Sorry for the delay in my starting. This lecture gives a brief introduction to some of the major themes in early Greek architecture. We will talk about when we talk about archaic architecture, we almost exclusively are talking about sacred architecture, mostly temples dedicated to the Greek gods, the most expensive of which were constructed from marble for the gods to live in. The buildings that the archaic and classical Greeks built for themselves, for human purposes, were mostly wood. And this goes for less grandiosely well-funded temples as well. And these wooden structures have little that survives for us to talk about. The earliest marble temple that we know of is at Olympia, where the Olympic Games were held. This was probably the original temple of Zeus Olympius, but a much larger and richer temple was built next to it in the early classical period, and so this original structure was rededicated as a temple to the god Zeus's wife, Hera. One interesting thing about this building is that it seems to have been built in pieces, a little at a time. The stone foundation was laid first, and then gradually marble columns were erected to hold up the roof, probably as wooden columns deteriorated and had to be replaced. We assume that a stone roof was added last. We don't know what the architects of the Temple of Hera let me try that again. We don't know why the architects of the Temple of Hera made the architectural and artistic choices that they did. They probably copied the old wooden styles in stone as closely as they could. What we do know is that this style of the old building establishes a pattern that is repeated throughout sacred architecture, all over archaic Greece and well into the classical period. The columns are fluted, which means they have a vertical ridge around them, or they have vertical ridges all around them. They are a little bit squat and become wider at the bottom, and on top, these columns are capped with capitals that are bowl-shaped. The columns stand in front of the building, and sometimes there are columns that surround the whole structure. We call this style of building the Doric order, and it's named after the Doric capitals on top of the column. And it was this style that dominated all Greek sacred architecture for generations. Doric temples always have gabled roofs at the top that meet in a peak, and we assume that the triangular face of the temple that the roof formed was often painted to make it more interesting to look at. In the 6th century BC, some clever person hit upon the idea of filling that triangular space, or pediment as it was called, with relief sculpture. The earliest example that we have is shown here on the Ionian Greek island of Corfu. The central figure is a gorgon, the monster whose look could turn people to stone. We don't know exactly why, but the gorgon in Greek art was actually treated as a symbol of good luck. Maybe the idea was that she would scare away bad influences. If you look carefully, you can see on the reconstruction of the pediment that there is a winged horse right next to the gorgon. This is Pegasus. It's not so much common knowledge these days, but in mythology, the Gorgon Medusa was the mother of the winged horse Pegasus. And so, he was included among the pedimental sculptures along with his monstrous parent. One major difficulty with these spaces is that triangles, of course, narrow at the sides, and so our sculptor has added much smaller figures to the left and right, and they are necessarily smaller than the central figure. To our eye, the size difference looks awkward. In the classical period, later architects and sculptors will experiment with some very impressive ways of filling the narrow space at the sides of the pediment in ways that look natural and proportional. For much of the archaic period, temples that included marble generally had wooden parts as well. The first building that we know of that was entirely made of marble was fairly small. This building was dedicated by the polis of Sipnos at the shrine of Apollo Pythios, where the Oracle of Delphi is. The purpose of the building was to store all the dedications that Sipnos made to the god, and so it is called the Sipnian Treasury. This reconstruction serves to show that buildings, like freestanding statuary, were painted. The relief sculpture that surrounded the frieze holding up the roof of the Sipnian Treasury is truly astonishing. There are a lot of features recognizable from archaic statuary here, and also some Near Eastern influences held over from the Orientalizing period, most notably the lion. The fact that these figures are carved into the side of a marble slab and are not fully freestanding allows the artist to make a more elaborate scene. This scene depicts the battle that the Olympian gods fought with the giants in order to claim dominion over the universe at the beginning of time. You will probably see at once that this cosmic war is depicted as a hoplite battle, as a hoplite phalanx, so that we have here a contemporaneous image of what phalanx warfare looked like. The aesthetics of the pediment of the Sipnian Treasury have made some advancements over the first pedimental sculpture. This scene depicts a fight that the hero Heracles had with the god Apollo when Heracles tried to steal Apollo's sacred tripod. Here we see that the larger figures in the center are playing tug-of-war with the object. There are female figures on either side, which are shorter, and so they fit into the diminishing space more comfortably. And, to the side, there is a horse on its hind legs, bucking up just a little bit, but still fitting into its allowed space without any forced perspective. These are trends that will continue to develop throughout the history of pedimental sculpture in ancient Greece.